career in HR as a specialist in training and organization development. And when I've had the opportunity to speak with leaders and teams in organizations, I often hear that workloads are going up, stress is going up, pressure and demands are going up, but other things are going down. Appreciation is going down. Concern for how people are feeling is going down. Little support for them as human beings. So what's the result? Workplace stress and burnout are increasing at this particular time. So I'm very glad, Christine, that you put this event together tonight and brought me and John and David together tonight, because I'm passionate about the topic John mentioned, resilience, and I'll add well-being. I think all four of us tonight are passionate about those things. These are vital concerns in the work that I do as a career coach with job seekers, as well as the consulting I do with leaders and teams. So thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you, Terry. I want to pause for 1 second. I hit the record button and the play button, and it did not go live. So, John, I'm going to make you do your intro once again. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about mental health in the workplace. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons and the ups and the downs, and maybe even give you some tips and tidbits that you can incorporate into helping yourself or helping a fellow employee through this devastating time to get to the other side. And we have a panel of speakers. Terry had just talked about what he's about. And if you've seen him on the job seeker circuit, he loves to talk about resilience. And I will tell you, he is number one when it comes to that. However, we also have two others joining us tonight, John Gillen and David Malcham. And David is going to tell us about himself, and John's going to tell us about himself so that you have a better understanding of where they're coming from. But we want to hit mental health from all sides so that you can totally grasp it from 360. John, take it away. Tell me about yourself.
Well, good evening. My name is John Gillen. I am an HR practitioner as well as consultant. I spent half my career as an internal person and half external. And I'm very grateful to be here tonight. Thank you, Christine, for inviting us. And I do think that we are entering a new world of work in which we have a lot of opportunities in terms of creating new worlds of work and also challenges as well. And so this is about how can all of us be able to adapt and take advantage of the new world of work in which we are entering into, as well as being able to be stronger and hardier and more resilient, as well, and facing the challenges that we are. But at the end of the day, we're all helping you to be able to not just to survive in the new world of work, but also to thrive in it as well. I'm grateful to be here with the rest of the panelists to help all of you to do that.
I love that. Thank you, John. The best saved for last, David. Go for it.
Thank you, Christine. My name is David Malcham, up in Westchester, New York, not in New Jersey as everybody else is. And I come to this because from a little bit different background. I have a background in more than 30 years as an IT professional in management and leadership. I have more than 25 years experience in nonprofit volunteer leadership, as well as 28 years as being part of a men's mentoring network, which has, and during those three areas, I've seen an incredible diversity of people and thought, and based upon our topic tonight about mental health. And given where we're at, I just want to sort of highlight what John said about resiliency and the ability to thrive. And I want to highlight what Terry noted also about resiliency. This is critical, right? We were talking beforehand about how while we're going to share and what corporations need to do, part of what it is, part of what we're going to be talking about is this concept of resiliency and how do people handle their mental health in the 21st century in the workplace.
Awesome.
So I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, I am looking forward to it as well. We had a kind of a dry run the other night, guys, and 15 minutes, we're like, we'll be in and out. We'll just kind of make sure our IT works. Well, let me tell you, we talked for an hour and 15 minutes, and I think we probably could have still went on longer because we were so pumped. We were so excited and passionate about the topic. And it led to another conversation, which led to another. And it was all centered around the mental health. But yet we had so many perspectives, and we were able to bounce ideas off of one another, and that just made it so worthwhile. So I'm sure that you will love this conversation this evening. All right. Now, to get started, we had talked about workplace taking on the end-all, be-all for society. The world of work has definitely changed in the past 50 years. I think we can all agree upon that. There doesn't seem to be high participation in other outlets outside of work. For example, church, it's still populated, it's still well attended, but not as much as it was maybe 50 years ago. There's not something going on every night that's going to take up our time. Maybe people are not as involved in other community activities such as the Elks Club or the Knights of Columbus. John, you had brought up a lot of really good points regarding that. So work has become it for so many people. They go to work, they come home, and that is taking a toll on their mental health. Maybe you can comment on that. What do you think?
Well, I do think, one of the things that what's happening is that the reason why we're talking about mental health within the workplace, I think one of the drivers of that is that the places where people and workers, employees used to be able to get a lot of the support for their mental health and their sense of belonging and sense of community and sense of, fulfillment in their lives. Those other areas of their lives are under challenge, and these institutions are no longer being able to serve the role that they once did in maybe a generation or two ago, and even less than that, maybe 20 years ago. And so as those other institutions become less important in people's lives, whether that be, whether it's, marriages or their relationships, with community organizations or even their connections, bowling leagues, other things that they used to be able to be involved with to create social connection have receded and become less important as more and more the only time people spend time with other people is in a sense of community is in their place of work. So work, they become more and more dependent on work as a place for them to meet all their other needs that I personally think that work is not able to necessarily meet for them, and is actually, I would believe, a dangerous place for all of us to be seeking the kinds of fulfillment and needs being met that really should be met in other areas of people's lives. And that puts people at risk, I think, if they're too dependent on an employer or any other external institution like that, to meet those kind of needs. And, that's why we're going to more personal resilience.
David, what's your take on that?
I just came back from a conference called Wellbeing at Work yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And while I really agree with John, what he said about people needing to take on responsibility, what I discovered at that conference is corporations are very much aware that mental health support is a very important issue. There is a report from Aon that came out where they said that 69% of the people they surveyed looked to their managers for mental health support. That's the same percentage as they look to their partners for support, and way much more support than, say, going to a therapist.
David, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just read an article saying the same thing, that people view their managers as a better support of their mental health and resources that they would point them in than anybody else, even their therapist. That exact same thing. Yes.
But if I may jump in, I would add, but are managers prepared to do this?
Oh, well, now we're talking about something else there.
I mean, this is tough enough for a spouse. Forget about a manager. I mean, managers, John would probably add to this. Managers are concerned about production, meeting production goals. They've got customers expecting that shipment, right. and to then get bogged down during the day with personal issues, let's say, take a broad term, that people are bringing into the workplace because, as John pointed out, other societal places in the past where you might have taken that, maybe to your pastor at your house of worship, your coach at your bowling league, whatever it might have been, they're gone. Our society has changed, not only our organization, our business organizations. And so now the poor manager is front and center in the middle of this perfect storm. And are they ready? And do they have the support that they need? Are they being given the training? Are they being given the information, the backup, whatever they would need to be that, let's say, first line of defense?
What did you find out, David, from that conference? Did they
Well,
say?
I want to bring in what Terry just said, which was training.
Okay.
That is what was needed for managers, right?
Okay.
What I heard the presenter after presenter talk about was there's a need to be aware of mental health issues as much we're aware now of physical disabilities, right? We support physical disabilities, but the mental health, they need to be aware of it, not to take it on, but how to address it and deal with it. One of the concepts they talked about was, or the statistics, metrics, was that up to 50% of a manager's time can be spent on these issues. So imagine what the impact is on the bottom line.
Yes.
The manager has to take care of the mental health.
Absolutely.
That was those two key metrics: the 69% of people looking to the manager, and then the 50% of managers being engaged in these types of issues on a weekly basis.
David, that's very interesting that you had a call, a conference about that topic yesterday, because I was on a different conference call about that topic as well. And they had said it was for SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, and they're offering a mental health ally certification to actually train and teach managers about mental health and the different parts of it and how to, deal with it in the workplace so they can make their areas and their organization more productive in the end. That was the goal.
I'm very glad to hear that. I think SHRM is probably in a very good position to do that, to bring that forward.
They're
David,
partnering with somebody else.
David, I have a question for you about the conference you went to. Did the topic of EAPs come up? Are employee assistance programs still in place? Are they still there to support employees that may need a professional trained listening ear, but done confidentially?
That's a great question, Terry, and surprisingly, no.
Interesting.
That thing, it's not as if that they ignored it. What they were really, the topic there, sort of shift, was about what to do with this situation. So EAP was referenced, right? But it wasn't. It was a very minor theme.
Interesting.
If we want to sort of diverge, because I want to get back to that use of an EAP, right? Which is something that I work for Verizon, and they have EAP available to their employees.
Right.
But I want to tie in what you just asked with what John commented before, was their main theme was resilience.
Yeah.
John, are you seeing a use of EAPs in the companies that you are consulting with?
I can only say, that EAPs are, my experience with EAPs are, they don't offer, and I've obviously been involved with referring employees who've been in various issues in the workplace, to EAPs. EAPs do not offer that many sessions or that much time per se. Wow. So they're very, very limited. It could be 2, 3, 4, and some of the issues that employees are bringing to the EAP, essentially the EAP really becomes only referral services, not treatment services. And so also really what it depends upon is the company's, underlying, mental health benefits in their medical plans, and a lot of times, as you may know also, that companies who may be talking about, as much as they may talk about mental health and these kinds of issues, are also limiting the number of visits that they could have to a psychotherapist. Maybe.
Is that because of the expense, like prescription drugs and that kind of thing? Or
I could just say for in some ways, the plans are paying more for the drugs than they pay for the treatment, for the psychotherapy treatments. And you would think that some of these issues, that the drugs, while they may be palliatives, they may be address some of the symptoms. They're not getting at the underlying issues that are causing their anxiety.
I think we can all agree with that.
That's in the workplaces. And I'm not sure necessarily is that the healthcare benefits are tied necessarily to the issues, that the rhetoric about about the, the well-being. One of the
Is
things,
an EAP different for different companies in this, like, different companies have different health insurances, right? There's lots of different choices out there. So is an EAP always going to be so many visits, or so many doctors are covered and then the other ones aren't, or are they all different? I've seen, some are coming out with, chat or text and get therapy, or watch a video, or what have you. I'm just wondering, because I don't know.
To me, my experience has been they're. I'm not to say they're not helpful. I'm not to say they provide a focus, and I think they provide a bridge to other services.
Okay.
But it is not necessarily a place where you're going to be, quote unquote, any treatment for things. I mean, if you have a credit issue, they can connect you with credit,
Okay.
counseling services. They have other things. You need elder care, they can help you with elder care, for resources, but they themselves are not a provider per se.
Interesting.
And very limited in terms of what they are. Triage in many ways.
Okay.
I mean, they help to understand things. I have put employees through performance improvement plans, or they help them to get to, they were how to do a limited number of sessions, or, to get them to, drug and alcohol or some kind of an addiction treatment program per se, but they're not doing any of those services per se.
Was that mentioned at all, David, at the conference yesterday?
I have to admit, I don't have the EAP practitioner.
Okay.
I'm not an HR, right? I'm a career coach.
Mhm.
That's how I know Terry. So I can talk about the fact that EAPs are available,
Right.
for some companies. I can't speak to it across from HR, so I don't want to go there. But I would turn it over to Terry, because he's had much more experience from that perspective. Like, what are you seeing, right, within your career transition and executive coaching
Mhm.
that ties in with this concept of EAP? I mean, as a coach, right, we have a delineation of, we are not therapists,
Exactly.
right? We may help a person, we may guide a person, but we're not therapists. So what are you seeing?
Yeah. For the most part, I'm seeing people who are, ready to jump on the job search and get on with it, do their resume, start networking, figure out what LinkedIn is, and how are they going to find the next job. So for the most part, it's very much, full steam ahead. Let's find that next job. With occasionally somebody who comes to us who's really having a very hard time with what just happened to them, that experience of job loss. And when somebody's really like suffering, you can tell they're suffering, they just can't, move past the feeling of betrayal, the feelings of anger, which are not unusual when somebody gets terminated, especially if it's a shock. They didn't see the handwriting on the wall, et cetera. It's not unusual for somebody to come to us in that state. And every once in a while, we'll encounter a client that really is that's where they're at. And they're not going to be ready to work on their resume or their cover letters or their interview prep until they've worked their way through that stuff. And I will often say that very statement, David, that you mentioned. I am not a therapist. So I put that out there and then I encourage them to actually seek that kind of expertise if they're really feeling like they need professional help.
Right.
And that's not something my company offers, but there are resources like that out there. And I encourage people in those particular cases to seek out such resources.
When I was doing a little bit of research for this panel this evening, I had just, read about EAPs, what are the services that are offered, and different things, but I wasn't sure if it was across the board or if it was company to company. The one thing that I did see over and over again was EAPs were just the foundation, just the start. Kind of like what John said,
Yeah.
It's kind of a referral source, just putting out the fire. And you know what? Okay, let's put out the fire, but take it this step further. And the EAPs seem to work better if they are supported by other things.
Yeah.
And such as having some kind of emotional support system that's going on, and just different groups that are maybe, hey, let's have a walking club, or let's have a de-stress painting night, or something to that effect, where you're kind of finding an interest in just not thinking about life and work and all those other things that are stressing you out, and you could just focus on something else.
So that brings up the key word that I want to sort of bring up, but I want to hand it over to John because of some of the prep, which was empathy.
Yes.
That was also in part of the resilience. Another word was empathy in talking about that. And in our prep, we were talking about emotional intelligence.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought it up. I was just going to say that. So thank you, David.
Right. Right. So what was interesting in our prep, where John referenced, he said, let's get away from emotional intelligence and consider emotional empathy. Yeah. Right. And so what they were talking about at the conference is this awareness in action. So one of the people who were speaking, the empathy wasn't like, okay, let's take up weeks and weeks and weeks of conversations about this situation. But it could have been something simple. This person was going through cancer treatment, right? And the awareness of her team of, that they need to pick up some slack, right? Or she needed some time off. There's empathy in that workforce versus I've heard stories of people having debilitating mental health or physical diseases, and the boss is like, well, keep working, right? So, I think those are rare occasions, but I think emotional empathy, which is that emotional intelligence in action, was what John was talking about, is really, really important. So, John, what would you add?
I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that they're asking managers to be better at some of these issues. Most managers I know, one of the problems is that we are not selecting managers based on other things. We select managers based on business results. Most managers are interested in being successful in their own careers, necessarily, and very oftentimes very focused on the business objectives that they've been outlined with. And they, in some ways, my experience is a lot of the time they resent, the having to address these employee issues, and that these employees are not necessarily being more professional, more appropriate, or more emotionally mature in terms of their ability to address these issues on their own, rather than getting the manager or the business leader involved. So there is a disconnect in some ways in terms of, and I also think that employees are coming to their managers. I mean, this statistic that people are expecting as much emotional support from their managers or their spouse. I mean, that's terrifying to me. I think really unsustainable and unhealthy, and this is again why we go back to all of us have to become more self-responsible for these kinds of things in our own internal resourcing, to enable us to be able to be successful, in the new world of work, which is going to be by nature less supportive, I think, personally.
I wonder, John, if we're talking a lot about mental health and how it affects employee engagement or just their productivity on a daily basis. And they've done studies. I even put it in the chat box for $1 investment in promoting mental health material. It has a $3 to $5 return. And there are a lot of different studies out there. That's just one. Does that affect how good a manager can be by promoting and endorsing and, rah-rahing mental health resources to their staff so that they can get them to do the best job that they can, so that their department or organization can be the best that it can be? Do you think that ties in, or not really, or not enough to be worthy of a comment of how awesome I am to pat myself?
Look, and I think one thing about, I guess, is, those of us in HR, we've been dealing with employee engagement for, decades now. So, at least in the 80s, I know it's at least a start in the 80s. This moved from employee satisfaction to employee engagement. And HR spent a lot of time on these employee engagement scores. And if you look at Gallup's scores about employee engagement over the last 40 years, it has not moved in 40 years. After all the billions of dollars that have been spent in employee engagement, 70% of people still hate their jobs.
Right.
70%. Wow.
Yeah, three out of 10 are engaged, right?
Exactly right. And this has
Wow.
been consistent over 40 years. You look at Gallup, and it has moved. It moved a little during the Great Recession of 2008, where people were grateful for their jobs at that point. But that is really the only time it actually went up. So
That's
not necessarily that they were they were engaged because they didn't necessarily want to be a part of a downsizing that happened during, the financial crisis. So there was a little blip during the financial crisis. So I just, putting that into perspective, I think sobering on all these kinds of issues, there would have to be a real revolution, I think, because managers are there to manage business results and not to manage, romper room, so
Okay.
I think that I think that's unrealistic expectations. Most managers that I know, to expect them to replace a therapist, or a spouse in terms of a loving presence in someone's life.
Okay. All right. I think that's absolutely fair. Absolutely.
I want to go to Terry.
Yeah.
I wanted to add, one of the things we haven't hit on
Yes.
is the impact of COVID
Mm-hmm.
on mental health and the blurring of lines between home and the office. And I think the numbers that we're seeing is indicative of that. Before COVID, right, 5%, one of the statistics that they shared at the conference yesterday, in general, 5% of the people work remotely.
Right.
As we're coming out of the pandemic, 30% either work remotely full-time or in hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then for those 2 years, there was this blending of home and work life, work life.
Right.
And to me, those numbers, at 69% for home and for work, is indicative of that situation, right? If we're all sitting, I think John may be in an office, but I'm sitting at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
I work at home. And if I turn around and I bring that situation, right, immediately, as soon as I walk down the stairs to my family, that's important. I used to teach meditation years ago. And one of the first topics I would teach people is be conscious of what happens when you transition between your home life and your work life, and vice versa, right? But so
We don't have that commute anymore, right? We're not getting in the car and driving. Right? It's walking into the kitchen.
and you see the person who you're pissed off at earlier, and then you go like, oh my God, I'm pissed off. Then you come back to your meeting and go, right? We don't have that separation. I'm not disagreeing with what John is noting. I wanted to add in, like, here's the situation. How do we acknowledge it?
Mm-hmm.
And own up to what John is suggesting, right? That people need to be resilient. We keep using that word. People need to be responsible for how they separate work and life.
Right.
Yeah,
Things like that.
one of the things I want to, add on this is, that we think about it. The world is becoming harsher, let's say. Overall, life is becoming more challenging. I think there are many different reasons for this. And I do think, one of the things I want everyone to realize is that, the people who are, feeling more strained and they're concerned about their mental health, they're not going crazy. There are outside forces that never used to be quite as strong as there are now that are battering all of us and challenging all of us and depleting all of us. And therefore, I think that it's important that we all realize, 100 years ago when we had an agricultural culture, and everybody was on the farm, nobody had to go to the gym. You didn't have to worry about your physical health at that particular time, your physical fitness, because it was the nature of their daily work and their manufacturing jobs and the kind of nature of the work where they didn't need to get exercise after work because that's what they were doing. They're doing the manual work.
Right.
Similarly, now, I think that the reason is that the workplace in some ways can be one of the places of most toxicity in someone's life, and therefore, we have to be, just like we need to go to the gym, we need to spend more time in terms of our own mental resilience. And it's interesting to me, I know, hearing, the conferences and conference speakers speak about how the employer needs to do more. I believe that the employee needs to do more to protect themselves from the stresses at work, at the workplace, which can be one of the places of the most stress in their lives and not a place to be going for nurturance. So.
I agree. Well, Charles, he's saying, Charles there, some people need multiple services and it becomes a matter of what to deal with first. And often it's a long road ahead. And I think that goes for both the employee as well as the employer, to be able to juggle all of the stuff that's in front of them and figure out what's first. And sometimes having 2 or 3 things to help you along the way is definitely going to get you to the end or get you through to the other side. Absolutely. And David, when you were saying COVID, just walking into the other room or walking down the stairs, and we have a whole country that was on lockdown. But we had talked the other night, all those teenagers that were homeschooled or at home and not in school anymore, for how long? They're going to be in the workforce soon. So this is something that we are going to be living with for a very long time. It's not going to go away. So how do we deal with it? And Terry, we're coming right back to you. Resilience. It seems to be the key because we have to protect ourselves.
Yeah. Why don't we dig into that, since it's come up several times now, and we all have points of view on it. We're all passionate about it. Resilience, I think we could all agree, has been defined as how we respond to adversity, how we respond to challenges, and how we bounce back from setbacks, disappointments, things not going our way. So just in very general terms, let's sort of put that out there as what we mean by resilience. So if that's what we're talking about, look at the last couple of years with the pandemic, the shutdown, the work from home, the quiet quitting. All the many things that have happened, to me, they're all part of the resilience journey we've all been on, coping with the adversity, coping with the challenges, coping with the curveballs being thrown at. Wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet away from other people. We have all been through something incredible. And look at, here we are tonight. We made it through. We've learned. It is a new world with a new normal. And we all adapted. So I think we are living proof of our own resiliency. And I guess my point of view on resilience, and I'll throw it to the others, is we all have it. We have the resilience. We need to call upon it. We need to call upon it, and we need to cultivate it. And we can cultivate our resilience. The research seems to be saying that very clearly. And we can help others around us in the workplace to tap into their resilience as well. And I don't think we have to depend upon managers. I think managers have a part to play, but I go back to John's point of view that we have to take ownership of our own health, mental health, physical health, emotional health. We have to take ownership of it. And one of our biggest strengths that we can count on is that we have our own built-in resilience. We can adapt. We can come back from adversity and challenge. John, I'm going to throw the ball across to your box here.
Yeah, I think one of the things with the pandemic that I found interesting also is that how people did not, if we think about their managers as these nurturing, warm, empathetic people, how much employees were resisting going back to work while their managers were begging them to come back. So
Mhm.
if it was such a warm, nurturing, if they had such warm, nurturing managers, I think we would not have had as much resistance of a lot of people who did not want to go back into the workplace, which I believe in for many people is again one of the places where they experience the most, the most stress and a lot of negative, emotional triggering that happens between them and their coworkers.
Charles just keeps coming out with really good things. The leader that make a difference are sometimes not the managers.
Right.
Correct.
They could be other leaders in the environment that don't have the title, but they are leaders because
Absolutely.
they bring leadership to the team or to the department.
Yes.
Well, I want to bring one of the amazing things about Verizon is culture is a very important component of success, right?
Mhm.
And Hanan Isaacs asks, here's an important
Yes.
conversation. What are some accommodations? And one of the tools, well, a couple of items I want to point out. One is end a meeting 5 minutes before the next one. Something is simple, right? Normally, I mean, I know this. I work in IT for years. You go from meeting to meeting to meeting. Sometimes you're double booked and triple booked, right? There's nobody sitting there pronouncing, be safe, be resilient. But if you just say, no, I'm giving you 5 million. If I'm giving you 5 minutes before the next meeting, right? That's huge. That's like a little break somewhere along the way. Another part that they talked about is flexibility, right? Because of the pandemic, the roles of caretaking and women re-entering the workforce, they were talking about, those changes, right? People got accustomed to being there for their kids when they didn't have to be, and how do they shift? So flexibility was another operative word. Now, flexibility didn't mean that, the way they were talking about doesn't mean like, oh, you want to take a vacation for a month, and get paid? Go right ahead. No, that's not what they were saying, right? You have to take a look. What they were talking about is based upon the culture of your company and the values of your company. How do you provide that flexibility? How do you acknowledge that there are small ways for people to do self-care, right?
Mhm.
So that without having to make major pronouncements, okay, let's take a 30-minute break. Now, they also talked about various corporations that up and down, there's a very large IT corporation I heard that company-wide, they have a mindfulness practice, company-wide, right?
Mhm.
That they brought a practice into the CEO and the C-suite, and they loved it, and they said it's for everybody. But that was the value of that corporation.
Right.
So again, here's possibilities, but it's not as if I'm as John said, we're not sort of coddling them, right? Just providing opportunities and acknowledging that something's going on, while being honest about what we got to deliver.
So, John, what have you seen when you're, visiting different companies, you're consulting, and just observing what they're doing as far as this goes, when they have to make mental health reasonable accommodations? How do you know when, or is there a rule, like a hard rule, like you have to have a doctor's note, or like how does that work?
I appreciate Hanan's question, and as he would know, obviously the concept of reasonable accommodations is coming out of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and employers are required to make reasonable accommodations to it. But we have, the second part of that is that to enable people to perform the essential functions of the job. So it is depending on what is the accommodations that is upon the employee to request the employer to make, and whether or not, depending on a lot of other factors, whether or not that requests are reasonable. And that sometimes has to do with the size of the company. Smaller employers may say that they are unable to make the accommodations being requested are too much for the company, where larger organizations like a Verizon would have a harder time, saying that they didn't have the resources to provide some accommodations like that. So, but again, one of the things I think that is also exacerbating some of these issues, the nature of work that we have is no longer person to machine. where people did not have to have a lot of interaction with their co-employees. You know, one of the things about the nature of work now, it is much more collaborative. You cannot usually do your job without, you know, your interactions and ability to function well and to team with other people from different functions, different areas, different parts of the world, different cultures that we never had before. You know, when I first started work, we hardly ever left our own department. And I remember it was a radical idea that we were on a cross-functional team with people from finance. So, you know, and so now we're through Zoom and through things like this, hardly everything that I deal with really is with my professional colleagues, where I'm dealing with business leaders in all different kinds of functions in all different parts of the country and all different cultures in all different parts of the world, and you know, a lot more diversity on all dimensions of that, you know, and not just our functional things. So the requirements for every employee to have better interpersonal skills than they ever were required to have before just adds to the issues related to what Anna was asking. Is like,
so your answer is it depends, right?
well, the only thing is, like, if you think about some of the mental health issues, you know, these affect all parts of a person's life. They're pervasive in terms of what they affect. And, you know, let's put it this way. If an employee comes to me, you know, comes to the company or an employer and says, I'm looking for an environment that is not going to trigger me and run in my post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, I cannot provide that kind of an accommodation. That is unreasonable to expect. So on some of the mental health issues, you know, or if they need to be isolated, work by themselves, or not to be bothered by anyone else, you know, that's going to be very difficult in terms of whatever the job responsibilities are. So does depend. It always depends. It actually always depends on two things. First is what that job description is and what is the essential functions of the job that the person has. It also depends on what the employee is asking for. And the third thing is in some ways, it depends on the size of the organization and their legal obligations or economic resources to be able to, you know, to meet those accommodations. So yes, it does depend.
Hannah, I hope that helped. Although I already suspect you knew the answer.
Yes, he does.
I did want to show you another comment that we have. It's from a LinkedIn user, and I'm not sure who that would be, but the second sentence, there is individual resiliency and organizational resiliency to consider. We did talk about that there is a difference. We have resilience, and it could be on a small level and a big level, and it means different things. So Terry, take it away, because
I think I touched on individual resiliency earlier. Organizational resiliency is how well the organization adapts to changes in its own environment. So competitive changes, regulatory changes, changes in the weather, global warming, political changes, right? Let's say you're doing business in a volatile part of the world, and all of a sudden things explode over there. That's going to affect that organization, and they're going to need to adapt. That kind of adapting to forces impacting on the organization could be one way of describing organizational resilience. The organizations that can adapt, that can change, that can learn and grow in the face of all of those kinds of factors, we would describe as quite resilient. Organizations that don't, that fold or falter or fall, unfortunately, they're probably going to lose out.
So, John, let me ask you this. If we have an organization that is resilient and it is adaptable and it's agile to all those different changes and things around them, isn't an organization made up of people, and do those people need to be resilient so that the organization can be resilient, or not necessarily?
Terry's right in terms of we always traditionally thought about organizational resiliency as the ability of the organization to respond to the external market. And if you look at the number of, let's say, Fortune 500 companies that have lasted for 100 years, it's a real lesson in terms of how resilient and flexible organizations, have been. So, and it's remarkable about, the roots of some organizations in terms of the products that they sell, today and things like that. So there are many companies we can talk about now who have been very, very, successful at that. But part of that is, I think regarding organizational resiliency, a lot of times is that really goes down to organizational culture and organizational values, and how much do they, all of us who lived through some of these organizational initiatives, when creativity became, quite an issue, there is no way that you can, support creativity in an organization unless you're willing to allow people to fail. Creativity is about failure. It's not about success. And oftentimes the organizations that fail to be creative are those who are unwilling as a culture to allow anyone to ever fail. If everyone who tries something to be creative, is failed and shot at noon, it will not be. Your creativity, your innovation initiative will not succeed.
David, you were just talking about this before we got on. You celebrated, somebody had 50 years at your company, right?
Yes.
That is huge.
Incredible.
And he must be a resilient individual, especially since the company has been through a couple different changes, depending on that weather or corporate culture or whatever it happened to be, right? So we have you have examples of both.
And I think that's a great dichotomy. If you think of resiliency of people in the organization who have lasted 50 years, this is pretty unique.
That's huge.
I know that when I was going through a job search and I was talking with other people, and they go, "You lasted at AT&T for how long?" I was there for quite a long time, and people didn't understand that. So you have that resiliency, like of this person, versus I think what we started to talk about, and I think it could be another conversation, which is the younger generation workforce, right? And what's their resiliency? I had, leading teams. I had enough teams that we were doing really important work, but it was so granular that I had, some millennials come in and say, "Yep," and they just ghosted me, right?
Whoa.
And they just up and left the project because they couldn't understand the uniqueness of the telecom situation and how important it was. It didn't fit their idea of what cool technology would be. So where is their resiliency, and how do we adapt that? And we're talking about such a workforce, especially because of technology. There are three or four generations that are active.
There's actually, I just read an article yesterday, 5 generations.
Five, yeah.
Wow. Right?
Yeah.
5 generations that are active, right? They have completely different perspectives. And
yes, great point. They have completely different perspectives, because everything you do is what's in it for me. And it's about them and what their needs are and their goals, and they're not on the same page.
So how do we take that aspect of resiliency? It's a very weird aspect, right? Like that there's resiliency, there's organizational resiliency, there's a commitment to the organization and a commitment to the self all at the same time. And it seems to be very divergent and not necessarily integrated.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's one other thing there might be in what you're describing. There might be resistance. There might be resistance on the part of whatever generation it might be, even boomers like myself. I might be resistant in a certain situation, even when we're discussing something that could be described as good, a good change, a good project. I might still be resistant to it. And
nobody likes change, Terry, no matter what it is.
A baby with a wet diaper, I think, is the only human being that loves change. Right. Change that diaper. But all the rest of us, there may be resistance.
Yeah.
And that's another key communication aspect that they focused on yesterday, which is accepting that there is going to be change and communicating that.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that is so important. And here we are talking about change. We're talking about communication, talking about resiliency, and yet tonight's topic was mental health.
Yeah.
Somebody had, I think it was David, you had shared this panel presentation on your LinkedIn page, and someone had commented that mental health is kind of on the overused side, and everyone is claiming they have a mental health problem, and that it's all turning into this whole thing where it really doesn't need to be, and it should be reserved for only important things, and who decides what's important, I'm not really sure. But what is your take on all that?
I want to go back to, I'll let John chime in more, because he was owning that theme. Somebody talked about, let me say this. Somebody talked about flexibility. And so flexibility to me means giving, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, or taking a couple hour mental health, right? It doesn't mean I'm prancing around the office going, hey, okay, I'm suffering from anxiety. Somebody do something for me, right? So there's awareness. How do I build my systems? How do I build my systems around that acceptance with that expectation? So in that LinkedIn comment, yes. Are we getting too sensitive? I think it's a give and take, right? There is neurodiversity. There's anxiety, which is a lot of what's going on because of the pandemic. But then there's also people who do need accommodation, like true serious accommodation, right? Depression, right? And other aspects of mental health are known, right? This is it's biological. It's not somebody doesn't wake up in the morning and go, I think I'm going to be really depressed today. Right? so and I'm not talking about just whatever. There's situational depression, right? Yes. I'm not a mental health practitioner. I've seen it as a coach, and I've seen it as a mentor. Yes. Right? There's situational, and then there's the actual long-term health debilitation of with all these psychological classifications that impact the workforce. So it's about.
Do you think it's because we put a label on it all of a sudden? That people are talking about it and it's a thing, or it just always existed but underlying because no one really had a word to call it?
We can get into it's another whole about 2 or 3 hours, and we're talking about.
I told you, y'all, we all had too much to talk about.
Right. But what I would like to hear is, from John's perspective, because he's really engaged with this, right? Which is how does a business evoke compassion? What do you perceive? How does a business evoke compassion while letting people know that we've got to perform, right? We are a collective. We are collaborating.
I do think that this is, there are a lot of very, I've had an opportunity based on the nature of my work to deal with very senior level executives on, very difficult, challenging human issues beyond employee issues. These are human issues. And, and I've always been impressed in many ways by how compassionate many of these CEOs, can be with the human beings involved. And so, I'm not, taking that away. I think, part of it is, where is the balance here? And where is the balance in terms of the responsibility of the individual employee in terms of addressing their issues, and what is the responsibility of the organization? My contention is that what is happening in the workplace is that people are bringing issues to the workplace, that the workplace is ill prepared and ill equipped. And I don't think really will ever sufficiently be equipped to deal with, because that is not the nature of a business is to do, So, and what I'm suggesting is that it's happened only by default, not by design, but that the other institutional support things that enable people to feel a sense of belonging and to get their own emotional and psychological needs met as human beings are not being able to be addressed outside of workplace. Also because of work has become all more consuming. There was another part of time when, through unions and everything else, when, most employees were working, a 40-hour week, and companies did not want you to work over 40 hours because they had to pay for the overtime time and a half. And they would, have you scurrying you away, or have managers make sure you would not work over 40 hours. But as more and more the workforce becomes quote unquote exempt from overtime and becomes quote more and more professionalized in every way. And now an employer will want you, if you're a salaried employee, to be working, 80 hours a week. So they no longer even have the opportunities to work on these things outside of the workforce, especially for a lot of more and more professional level people, which is what more and more of the workforce is, where we have a smaller and smaller percentage of the workforce which is non-exempt, and overtime eligible. So I think you have those factors going on where employees, even if they want to do things outside of work and develop a personal life outside of work and have a community life and to do all those things, no longer have the luxury to be able to do that because of the demands of their job. And they have no choice other than to rely on their employer for everything.
So,
John, I don't want to take it up, but another part they were talking about is financial well-being, right? So people we're talking about white collar jobs, but there are plenty of people who need to have 2 or 3 jobs just to get by.
Yes.
Right. And they're bringing those issues also. Right. I remember talking to somebody at a grocery store. He's like, I love working and I get 4 hours of sleep and I work 16-hour days. I work 2 8-hour jobs, right? 6 days a week. Right. And he enjoys it. There are other people.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is like, one of the things that kills me, I watch all the labor statistics and everything else. I love the Bureau of Labor Statistics and everything else. I mean, we don't have a labor shortage. We really have a wage shortage, and so that
I love that, John. I love that you just said that.
So that awesome. we have a lot of people who are willing to work. Terry will tell you, willing to work, but not at the wages, that most employers are willing to offer.
I agree.
And so a lot of employers are willing to post and keep jobs open for extremely long periods of time, to continue to have, until they get someone, not who's more qualified, but someone who is willing to take the lower pay rate so they do not have to change any of their internal compensation plans for everyone else for internal equity reasons. So I think, on some of those things that, the wages have become, in real terms, wages for workers have gone down since 1979.
Yes, they have.
So, these are long-term trends, which were by, quote unquote, by design, I would say, that is started. And there are forces at work to ensure that continues to happen. And there are a lot of things that have been done in some ways to flood the labor market with more and more workers so as to keep wages of workers down, as well as to then increase corporate profits.
So let me ask everyone, if this is not a labor shortage, but a wage shortage, and we are speaking to managers and leaders and HR and whoever else is on this call or is going to listen at a future date, is it their responsibility to change their organization's wages in order to reduce mental health within their organization? Partially.
I think most organizations are unwilling to recognize or willing to admit, the price of turnover within their organization, how much time and effort that managers are now spending on recruiting people, that in positions that continue to turn over, that the brand, of the organization gets depleted in the marketplace. The only people who are looking at Glassdoor are not just, potential employees, but also customers, who can read it, or analysts from the Wall Street who can read this stuff. So, I don't think there's enough awareness, about that. And, it becomes to a point where there are so many job openings, and some of these job openings, these job postings are quote unquote eternal job postings that organizations keep the same jobs open for, never close the jobs. They're just always looking for people because they're managing to the turnover and to keep the wages suppressed. But that they're not incorporating the training costs of that. They're not. It was also very demoralizing to fellow employees. If you're in an organization, we're always needing to retrain other people all the time. So there are a lot of things about this that we're coming to a head on some of these issues that I think some smarter organizations are beginning to realize. That trying to be good at talent acquisition is not necessarily the best strategy, but something of a more comprehensive way of looking at all of your talent management on retention issues, on your culture issues, on where in which you are, that your people are your real competitive advances, the only one left, is changing some of the dynamic very slowly.
Absolutely.
But I do think is worthy of consideration.
For sure.
All right. Well, we are running out of time, and I thank you all for joining us, and of course for our panelists for sharing their information. And we could probably talk for another 2 or 3 hours about all these things that are tied to mental health. But I would like to give them all a few minutes for closing. And of course, I will put their LinkedIn contact information in the chat box. So if you'd like to connect with them or ask a follow-up question until we meet again, they will be happy to answer that for you. So just connect and ask them that question and start that conversation. But John, if you could tell us a little bit about takeaways that you would like everyone to remember as they sign off.
So, my 3 words that I like people to consider, related to how to think about, the future work neural resilience is, my 3 words are join, job, and joy. And when I talk about join, I think it's important that people actively, more than ever, seek out communities in which they feel a sense of their belonging, and that may be outside of their workplace. There are many through technology is both, the greatest thing, the worst thing has happened, because technology, I think overall has been a tool that's just been used to isolate people. People are no longer out on the street. They're in their bedrooms or in their offices at their computer and no longer interacting with people. We're going to have a generation of children who I am very concerned about their ability to interact with children, especially young boys. So I think this is a tragedy that's going to unfold. But they're also related to joining is to make sure that you're out and in person. These Zoom things are great, but they do not replace, your in-person meetings with people. And you need to understand that you need to make the efforts to get out and to meet people, whether it's the job search groups, in person, whether it's professional association meetings, whether it is, meetups or whatever they are, to social interaction and your ability to meet up with other people outside of your workplace is very important. Unfortunately, right now, the only place where a lot of people go to meet people and to be with people is work.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Yes.
So the second thing is job. And, I do think, I want to say that, the job, as Terry will tell you, is a very important thing for all of us. But I want to get off the word job and talk more about work. There's a difference between a job and work. And I think your work is very critical. You need to feel to be connected as social beings. You need to be connected to a sense of belonging and a sense of being involved with an effort greater than yourselves. And that's what work is. Work is an opportunity to join in with other human beings and to contribute and for your purpose and role and your contribution to society and the community in which you live. So I want you to think about job is a little different as work. And work doesn't matter whether you're paid or not. You need to be making a contribution and realize it's important for your satisfaction, your fulfillment, that you are engaged in meaningful work. And the last thing is joy. And I think we spend so much time in our society, we strive to everyone to help everyone to be happy. But a lot of happiness is momentary. And a lot of times, we have connected it with acquisition of things. And you're working so much to be happy. But I think that what we've lost is that there are ways in which to find joy within your life, which is more sustaining. And a lot of the joy that comes in life are actually internally based. Those do not come out of things that you can necessarily, have to buy and acquire, but things that you need to nurture and culture within yourself. And there is a richness within your internal life, that will help you to be resilient. And more than ever, you need to focus on your internal things to find your internal joy so that you can be able to be successful within the new world of work and the new world in which we're living. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And you gave some really wonderful points. And even Jason Hodge in the comments said, yeah, great points, John. David, how about you?
I'm going to go back to, we've talked about a lot. I'm going to go back to one of the metrics that John talked about, is that 70% of the people who are working are not satisfied with their jobs. So what can we do in our role? I think people are asking, and what can we do going forward is be curious. How can we help people enjoy their jobs more, right? Companies can, somebody had asked, like, can we do training? Can you find out what their strong suit is along the way? That's one. And then the other one is that, because we introduce this all over the place from one of my men's groups, the founder of our group has the 5 C's. And I think it's very indicative of what's needed within a servant leadership mindset, which is what I think where we're at in corporations, right? And those 5 C's are curiosity, courage, compassion, connection, and commitment, right? So when we take those 5 together, right, people think of compassion as something very soft. But if you include compassion as sort of accepting, and you still have to have a commitment towards your job. You have to have a commitment towards your company. You have to have the courage to go beyond, right? I'm feeling crappy today. I need to have the courage to go beyond and make something happen, right? These 5 C's, and there are plenty of others, creativity and whatever else, you can add them if we talk about it and allow the individuals, right, to own that. Give them the resources, talk about it openly from time to time, but allow them to adapt it as they move forward. And I think that will help improve our mental health issues. And thank you, Christine and Terry and John, for creating the connection tonight.
Thank you, David. And Jason, once again, I'm loving Jason. He's just lots of comments. Curiosity is such a powerful and inspirational tool, David. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Why
is. It sure is. Yeah. All right. Wrap it all up for us, Terry.
Okay, Kristen. I don't know if I can wrap the whole thing up. We covered it so much.
I know we did. We covered so much, right?
We could do two or three more of these
Absolutely.
panels. But I'm gonna close with 3 thoughts that I have for anybody here tonight, or who might watch this on the replay, who is actually in a career transition. If you're in a career transition, you're dealing with adversity, you're dealing with challenge, you're dealing with frustration. And so just in the nature of that process of a career transition, you definitely want to keep careful watch on your overall health, mental health, physical health, emotional health, etc. Secondly, don't forget, you have value. You're in a very tough, competitive job market. John Gillen talked to some of the dynamics going on there. Make sure you know your value, your skills, your capabilities, your experiences, and what you can bring to the table. And go find a coach somewhere that can work with you to help you strengthen your negotiation abilities, so that you can advocate for yourself when it comes time to talk with an employer. And third, take good care of yourself. I think that's been one of our themes tonight. How important it is for everybody to take responsibility for their own well-being. So take good care of yourself. If you're going through a job search, you may feel miserable a lot of the time. I've been there. I've had those feelings. I know what it's like, but you've got to take good care of you. Find ways, whether it's yoga, Tai Chi, running, walking, there are a whole bunch of ways to take good care of yourself and stay in good shape, physically, mentally, and emotionally, so that you're motivated, energized, and ready for opportunity when it knocks on your door, and it will.
Absolutely. I think those are great points as well. And it goes along with what John and I were talking about earlier. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you have a job, if you're in job search, if you're thinking about going for another job, just always be ready and take care of yourself so that you can be more accepting of that opportunity. So I think that it was awesome. Thank you again, guys. I just wish we had so much more time to cover even more information. We'll have to do a follow-up somewhere along the line
Let's
to talk
do
a
it.
little bit more. Thank you once again. And thanks to our attendees for attending. We did run over a few minutes, so I appreciate you hanging out with us. And sorry about the delayed recording, but we'll get it right next time. So, all right. You have a wonderful evening, and we will see y'all soon. All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Be well.